Hi everybody. So first of all, apologies for the video being late. Better late than never. But sorry it's taken a while to get it up. There's a couple of reasons for that, which I'm going to explain, and doing a bit of a different kind of video this month. Normally I comment on the comic strips, but the reason, or one of the reasons for there being a bit of a delay in that is something that's kind of good news, which is that we're right on the edge of agreeing a contract for a graphic novel about the life and philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. So you may know that's something that I've been working on for quite a while, since last October or something now, and we put together a very detailed proposal that you have to do for these things and outline the script and so on, and we have an offer from a major publisher, and so that's probably all I can say really at the moment, because we haven't finalised the details yet, but basically it's going ahead. So we have a graphic novel coming out, and that's what I'm going to be doing over the next year. So there will be lots of comic strips, because there will be excerpts and stuff that comes out of the research that I'm doing for that. So I think it actually makes sense to do this little kind of digression, or I feel like kind of explaining that, because things are about to change on the Patreon page. Because that's a big project. It's going to take about a year, and it'll kind of continue to be promoted and so on after that. So I'm kind of building up to that, and I thought do things a bit different today. I'll tell the story of how that thing came into existence, and a little bit about the way that it's been written and stuff. I think that might be of interest to you, because like I say, it's going to shape everything that happens from now right this very point forward, really. So my last book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, was published by St. Martin's, and it was just part of Macmillan. It's a big New York publishing house, and so that's been reasonably successful. It was the number one best-selling book on philosophy for a couple of weeks in the US, and it's still going strong, so we're quite happy with that. And off the back of that, we're now publishing another book, which is also about the life and philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, but it's a graphic novel. It's kind of like a comic, basically, format. And the way that happened was an illustrator got in touch with me, called Z, who's based in Portugal, and you've seen a lot of examples of his work on my Patreon page. And Z was working on a comic based on a play by Aristophanes, and he wanted to do some stuff with me, and eventually we got around to doing a few samples. We did 3 sample comics, which you've probably seen. We did 3 web comics about Marcus Aurelius that are just about 10 panels or whatever. They're kind of short, and I'll tell you the story because it's kind of interesting. I was speaking at a conference in London, our Stoicon conference, and I was supposed to be printing some stuff, like bookmarks or something, just to put some promotional stuff out for How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. And having lived in London for a long time, I kind of thought, there's going to be a printer, there'll be a bunch of printers around, this should be pretty easy. It's a pretty simple job. So I was travelling through London, and I should say, I'm in a hostel at the moment. You can see a bunk bed behind me. So I travel a lot, and I'm in kind of temporary accommodation at the moment in a hostel that I use a lot. So not my usual kind of office setup. And I was staying in London, and I emailed a bunch of printers. None of them got back to me, so I phoned some and didn't get back to me. And I was kind of starting to run out of time, and so I went, I'll just go down the local high street and ask a bunch of people if there's a printer nearby, and they said there wasn't, which really surprised me. And then I went in a random shop, and the guy that ran it, I think he sold tiles or something like that, said there's a weird shop that's just opened round the corner, and it's called War, and it's run by a guy from the north of England. I think he's an artist. They do some sort of printing, so it's kind of vague. And I thought I'll go and check it out, and sure enough, it was a shop called War, run by an artist guy from the north of England, and they did do some sort of printing, but they didn't do the kind of printing that I was looking for. The guy told me he did what's called giclée printing, which is high quality fine art printing for stuff that you would hang on your wall so the ink doesn't fade. And so I thought, well, that's not really what I'm looking for. And then I thought, well, I'm running out of time. I've only really got a day or so before the conference. So I thought this is better than nothing. And I went back and I got panels out of the original source files for the webcomics printed as 4 prints in high quality, and I took them to the Storycon conference in London to put them out on display, just so we had something out for people to look at. That's the best I could come up with by chance. And then I didn't really think much more of it. I gave some of them away to some of my friends and colleagues, and then I forgot that there are people that work in the publishing industry that attend these events, and there was a guy there who saw the panels and got talking to me about the idea of doing a graphic novel, and from there, like, that led on to doing discussing this idea a lot and working it up a lot, and then doing a full written proposal with an outline of the script, and the outline of the script got a little bit more detailed because there was a bit of a debate about how many pages it was going to end up being, so I did a fairly detailed script for it to get a better picture of the actual number of pages we're going to have to illustrate, and so now we have this idea of a book about Marcus Aurelius, and there's already been interest for a number of quarters in buying the TV and film rights to these books. This one I think will lend itself even more to that, because it's a graphic novel. It's like a screenplay in some respects, and the way we kind of pitched it was, it's kind of you have to sometimes be able to summarize things up like an elevator pitch in simple terms, in terms of other publications that it might be comparable to. So I said, what I'm proposing is like a cross between 300 and Logicomics. And so 300 is that thing about the Spartans that was made into a movie. There's not much philosophy in it, but it's a Sword and Sandals type thing, and it was successful. So it proves that Sword and Sandals stories, as they're known, can have a big audience. It was extremely successful. And Logicomics is a very different sort of comic that was a bestseller. It was written by some guys in Greece, but it's about the life of Bertrand Russell and the development of modern logic. So Logicomics proves that there's a market for a graphic novel that takes philosophy seriously and also intertwines the development of philosophical ideas with a narrative about a philosopher's life. And so put these two things together, cross between Logicomics and 300, we can imagine the idea of a graphic novel about the life of Marcus Aurelius and how he developed his use of Stoic philosophy throughout the course of his reign. So this would differ from How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, which has more discussion from a modern perspective on the techniques in terms of CBT and so on, comparing Stoic techniques to modern research in psychology. That would almost be like kind of commentary or exposition or whatever, but there are bits of narrative about Marcus's life at the beginning of each chapter basically in that book, and so the graphic novel would be taking that story of Marcus's life and kind of developing it further in some ways, focusing on certain aspects of it, and also weaving the philosophical teachings in it more tightly. We have to teach the philosophy through the story more, rather than kind of being able to comment on it in the graphic novel format. And so the other thing that kind of we always want to do is, there's a big core audience for Stoicism, but there's also a lot of potential if you can reach outside that audience to people that are into kind of related things. And so always looking for ways to do that. Trying to do podcasts and things that are, I do podcasts that are run by people who are into Stoicism, but also try and reach outside that community and do other podcasts to people who aren't part of the core Stoicism community base, if you like, but they would potentially be into it. And so one way of doing that is actually maybe reaching people who would read a different format, like comic books or graphic novels, that might not normally read self-help books or philosophy books, and also possibly reaching a slightly younger demographic at the same time. So maybe the graphic novel kind of reaches a different audience, which is a good thing. And it allows us to kind of present some of the ideas in a more kind of human way, that I think even people that have read a lot of books on Stoicism would find kind of relatable, and offering a different perspective to actually kind of see it unfolding before them. It's also kind of timely because Gladiator 2, the sequel to the Russell Crowe film directed by Ridley Scott, is currently underway, and my understanding is that the screenwriter for that has a copy of How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, and has been looking at it as part of his research, and that film will maybe come out around about the same time as this graphic novel, so that's pretty good timing, because it's, as you may remember, Russell Crowe's character dies at the end of Gladiator, but the movie supposedly is about Marcus Aurelius's grandchildren, so there's probably going to be some references to Marcus Aurelius in the new Gladiator film again. If you remember, Richard Harris plays Marcus Aurelius in the first act of the original Gladiator film, and that introduced a lot of people to Marcus Aurelius and to the Meditations, into Stoicism. So there's a couple of things I wanted to say about the other stuff that's going on in the graphic novel that might be a little bit different. So one is, we've got to kind of talk about the Meditations and what Marcus says about philosophy, but we don't want lots of panels where there's a guy writing a book, because that might look a bit dull. We kind of wanted to have as much action as possible, but at the same time I thought, well, I kind of have to do this. We need to have the Meditations in it, and how he relates to it, and the ideas that are in it. So I kind of thought of ways to make that more engaging and approach it from a different perspective. And how much can I give away about this at this stage? It's an early stage, these ideas might change, but one of the ideas that I was proposing to do was to build it around the idea that Marcus's relationship with his main Stoic mentor Junius Rusticus, and the assumption that Rusticus probably wrote Marcus letters fairly frequently. There's some allusions to that. While once Marcus was stationed on the Danube, he would have left Rusticus, his main teacher, behind for the first time, and they would have presumably written to each other. Marcus mentions Rusticus writing to his mother, for example. And we have examples of Marcus's correspondence with his rhetoric teacher Fronto, so we can kind of speculate that he probably wrote to Rusticus. And then I'm going to assume that Rusticus, we believe that Rusticus died around the time that Marcus started writing the Meditations. I'm going to speculate that Marcus began writing the Meditations because Rusticus had died, and because their correspondence and his mentoring had ceased as a consequence of that. And so Marcus becoming his own mentor, and that maybe even the Meditations are kind of inescapably going over some of the things that he'd previously discussed with Rusticus, and maybe even contain references to things that they'd spoken about or that they'd written about to each other in letters, to personalise it a little bit more and make it into a character rather than just a guy going on about a book. And then so I want to have him kind of thinking of Rusticus as he writes the Meditations, and maybe imagining his presence like a spectre or whatever, his deceased mentor, like Obi-Wan Kenobi or something, and then kind of like developing that idea as we go through the book, rather than thinking the Meditations is just a bunch of writing, because it really is, in a sense, Marcus writing about ideas that he inherited from people, from his Stoic tutors. Like, these ideas didn't come out from nowhere, and he didn't just read them in other books. Like, he spent years and years discussing them with flesh and blood human beings that he had a very strong relationship with. He opens the book by mentioning, in a sense, the Meditations opens with Marcus making it clear that he's writing about stuff that came from his Stoic tutors. So that's one thing that we're doing. And then the other thing is, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor deliberately has separate chapters on coping with pain, coping with anxiety, coping with anger, and so on, coping with desires. So it kind of covers this sort of range of self-help topics. And And I felt that with the graphic novel, that's too much. It's too kind of piecemeal an approach. We need to tell a story. It needs to be powerful and engaging, and there needs to be a solid therapeutic or personal development aspect to it, but it needs to be woven into the story. It can't just seem like it's kind of like bolted on or whatever. And yeah, I think it would be impossible to do that, covering that range of topics. So I thought right from the outset the best way to deal with it is to pick one. So if you want a book about Marcus Aurelius that covers all of these different topics, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor would be the place to look. But if you want an engaging story that teaches a central aspect of Stoicism and it's kind of more tightly woven together, then the graphic novel is going to do that, because it focuses more on the aspect of Stoicism that has to do with anger and empathy, and basically in general with the way that we relate to other human beings around us. So there's a number of reasons for picking that. Anger is more relational, so it's kind of lends itself more to being depicted in the visual format than like pain management might, for example. And we kind of know more about Marcus's relationships and the frustrations that he had, and the how he dealt with those in a kind of philosophical manner. So it fits in more neatly with the type of narrative that we're going to have to use for the graphic novel. And anger's kind of pretty visual, and there's going to have to be action scenes and battles and stuff like that in it, so anger kind of fits in fairly nicely with that theme. And there's he says a lot about it. He says more about anger than any of these other topics, so it seemed to make sense. Also, the Meditations in some respects is a book about his overcoming anger. The very first sentence in the Meditations says that Marcus, he opens the book by saying he learned from his grandfather nobleness of character and freedom from anger, like right at the very outset. And then there's that passage, book 11, passage 18, where he lists 10 different strategies for coping with anger. Most modern psychotherapists would struggle to identify 10 distinct cognitive strategies for coping with anger off the top of their head anyway, but Marcus rattles off a list of 10. He calls them 10 gifts from Apollo. So that tells me he has a very nuanced, very coherent, very systematic, comprehensive idea of anger. I mean, it's extraordinary. And it's also not just a bullet point list that he kind of rattles off once. He returns over and over and over again throughout the Meditations to selections from that list. So it's extremely significant to him. And he also happens to tell us that he struggled with his own feelings of anger. And he mentions in particular, of all people, the person that he said that he used to become angry with and particularly struggled with was Junius Rusticus, his Stoic mentor, which is also kind of has another interesting dimension to it. But then also, Marcus obviously had to deal with various hugely significant betrayals and a civil war and his relationship with Commodus and so on. So there's lots of opportunities for relationship conflict and dealing with insults and anger and betrayals and so on. So I think that makes sense. I'd be interested to know your comments. So this is kind of an exclusive. It's a little bit hush hush actually at the moment. So you're getting an insight into something that's in early stages, but we know this is going ahead now. I thought, only really just starting work on it, only just got the proposal approved, as it were. So let me know what you think about the general idea. Again, apologies for being a little bit late this month, but it's because we've kind of been working on this stuff, and so it's kind of put some of the work that we're doing for a number of reasons kind of has had to be a bit suspended. But we will be resuming it soon, and actually with gusto, because we're going to be doing we're going to be almost completely focused on doing comic strips and graphic novels for the next year or more going forward. So I hope to be sharing a lot of that with you, and like I say, thanks for your patience, and I look forward to seeing your comments on the video. Bye.